Have you ever felt it? That unsettling sensation that you're not entirely alone in your own home. That prickling on the back of your neck as you walk past a certain door, or the unnerving, heavy silence that seems to emanate from a forgotten corner of the house. What if that feeling wasn't just your imagination? What if a terrifying secret was lurking, hidden in plain sight, just beyond the comforting familiarity of your living room? Today, we delve into a story that will make you question every shadow and every creak in your own home. But before we unlock the door to this chilling tale, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, so you don't miss out on our weekly dives into the unknown. Now, settle in and prepare to discover the creepy secret that lurked just beyond the living room. The house on Sycamore Lane was a relic, a stubborn survivor from an era when craftsmanship was valued over cost efficiency. It was a two-story Victorian with a steep, gabled roof and intricate gingerbread trim that had begun to peel like sunburnt skin. To Liam and Chloe, it was the culmination of a decade of saving, a tangible monument to their shared dream of escaping the cramped confines of their city apartment. To their 7-year-old daughter, Maya, it was a castle, a labyrinth of endless possibilities with a yard big enough for a swing set and a dog they had yet to adopt. The move-in day was a symphony of chaos and cardboard. Boxes labeled kitchen, books, and fragile were stacked in precarious towers, creating a makeshift maze through which the family navigated. The air smelled of old wood, dust, and the faint, not unpleasant aroma of lavender from a sachet one of the movers had left behind. Liam, a graphic designer who worked from home, was already mentally arranging his office in the sun-drenched room overlooking the sprawling backyard. Chloe, a freelance writer, felt a story brewing in the old house's bones. It was in the living room, a grand space with a marble fireplace and bay windows, that they first noticed it. Or rather, they noticed its absence. On the long wall opposite the fireplace, between a built-in bookshelf and the arched doorway to the dining room, was a section of wall that just felt wrong. The floral wallpaper, a faded but elegant pattern of climbing roses, was seamless, yet there was a faint, almost imperceptible outline beneath it. It was the precise shape and size of a door. "That's odd," Liam said, running his hand over the surface. The wall was solid, unyielding. There was no knob, no hinges, not even a keyhole. It was as if a door had been methodically and completely erased from existence, its memory plastered and papered over. The blueprints didn't show a door here. Chloe traced the faint outline with her finger. Maybe it was a pantry they decided to close up, or a connection to the dining room they found impractical. She tried to sound casual, but an unbidden shiver traced a path down her spine. The door seemed to emanate a peculiar coldness, a stark contrast to the warm, late summer air filling the rest of the house. Maya, oblivious to her parents' unease, was busy claiming a corner of the room for her dragon's lair, a hoard of stuffed animals and picture books. "Maybe it's a secret door," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with the magic of childhood imagination. "Like in the stories, it probably leads to a hidden treasure." Liam chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "You might be right, kiddo. We'll call it the mystery door for now." But the name stuck, and so did a quiet, creeping sense of disquiet. In the days that followed, as the family settled in and the house began to feel like a home, the unseen door remained a silent, unnerving presence. It was easy to ignore during the day, when sunlight streamed through the windows and the house was filled with the sounds of life. But at night it was different. When Liam would come downstairs for a late-night glass of water, his path would inevitably take him past the living room. He'd find his gaze drawn to that blank stretch of wall, the floral pattern seeming to writhe and shift in the dim light from the hallway. He started to imagine he could hear things faint, scuttling sounds, like mice in the walls, but deeper, more resonant. He dismissed it as the groans and creaks of an old house settling, but the explanation felt thin, unsatisfying. Chloe experienced it too. While writing late one evening at the dining room table, she heard a distinct, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was soft, almost inaudible, but it was there. She held her breath, listening. The sound seemed to be coming from the other side of the wall, from the living room, from the location of the phantom door. She stood up and walked to the doorway, peering into the dark living room. The tapping stopped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was somehow heavier, more profound than the noise it replaced. She told herself it was a branch against a window pane, a loose pipe, anything but the impossible. Maya, however, seemed to have no fear of the door. She would often sit in front of it, her back to the room, talking in a low, conspiratorial whisper to her dolls. Chloe would watch her from the doorway, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Maya would be having a one-sided conversation, her voice bright and animated, occasionally pausing as if listening to a reply. One afternoon, Chloe asked her, "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Maya looked up, her expression serious. "The whispering man," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He lives in the wall. He's lonely." A cold dread washed over Chloe. The whispering man? What does he whisper about? "Secrets," Maya said simply, before turning back to her dolls. "He knows lots of secrets." That night, Chloe brought it up with Liam. They were in bed, the comforting weight of the duvet a thin shield against the nocturnal sounds of the house. "She calls him the whispering man," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper herself. "She says he lives inside the wall." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. He'd been hearing the sounds too, more frequently now. A soft, dry rustling, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. He'd checked the attic for squirrels, the basement for rats. He'd found nothing. "She's a kid with a big imagination, Chloe. It's a new house. It's big and a little spooky. It's normal." Is it normal to hear tapping from a wall that shouldn't have anything behind it? Is it normal that the dog you wanted to get for Maya, the one from the shelter, whined and refused to even step into the living room when we brought him for a visit? He didn't have an answer for that. The memory of the beagle, so boisterous and friendly at the shelter, cowering and pulling at its leash at the threshold of their home, was a sharp, uncomfortable thorn in his logic. The incidents grew more specific, more difficult to rationalize. One evening, Liam was working late in his office when he heard a faint melody. It was a child's nursery rhyme, but it was distorted, played on what sounded like a tinny, out-of-tune music box. The sound was faint but clear, and it was coming from downstairs. From the living room. He crept down the stairs, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. As he reached the bottom step, the music box sound abruptly stopped. The living room was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights outside. The air was frigid, and the distinct, cloying smell of damp earth and decay hung in the air. He stood frozen for a long moment, every nerve ending screaming at him. The smell was strongest near the wallpapered-over door. He began to feel like he was being watched, not just in the living room but throughout the house. He'd be showering and have the certain conviction that someone was standing just outside the curtain. He'd be cooking in the kitchen and feel a cold spot pass by him, raising goosebumps on his arms. The house, once their dream, was beginning to feel like a cage, and the unseen door was its lock. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Maya had been quiet all day, a sullen, withdrawn version of her usually bubbly self. She refused to play in the living room, choosing instead to stay huddled in her bedroom. When Chloe went to check on her, she found her sitting on her bed, clutching a crude drawing. It depicted their family, Liam, Chloe, and Maya's stick figures, smiling under a bright yellow sun. But next to them, looming over their house, was a tall, impossibly thin figure drawn in black crayon. It had no face, only long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch and twist like branches in a storm. "Who is this, honey?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling slightly. Maya pointed a small finger at the black figure. "The whispering man," she whispered. "He's tired of whispering. He wants to come out and play." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. She looked from the terrifying drawing to her daughter's pale, frightened face. The rationalizations, the excuses, the determined disbelief, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a raw, primal fear. Something was in their house. Something was behind that door, and it was talking to their daughter. That night, after a tense, silent dinner, Chloe turned to Liam. Her face was set, her eyes burning with a desperate resolve. "I can't do this anymore, Liam," she said. "I can't live with this thing in our house. We need to know what's behind that door." Liam looked at the wall, at the innocent, faded roses that seemed to mock him. He had spent weeks telling himself it was nothing, that they were all just tired and stressed from the move. But he couldn't deny the cold knot of fear in his own gut. He couldn't ignore the music box, the tapping, the smell of decay. And most of all, he couldn't ignore the terror in his daughter's eyes. He nodded slowly, a grim acceptance settling over him. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse. Tomorrow we find out what's on the other side." He had no idea that in doing so, they would not be finding a simple, forgotten pantry, but an answer far more terrifying than any question they could have ever conceived. They were about to uncover the creepy secret that lurked just beyond the living room. A secret that had been waiting patiently in the dark, whispering for someone to finally let it out. The decision, once made, hung in the air between them, thick and heavy with unspoken dread. The following morning, the house seemed to hold its breath. The usual groans and creaks were absent, replaced by a profound, expectant silence. Liam stood in the garage, a crowbar in one hand and a heavy-duty sledgehammer in the other. He felt a tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with the weight of the tools. This felt like a transgression, a violation of an unspoken pact with the house itself. Chloe stood in the living room doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Maya was next door at a friend's house, a small mercy for which Chloe was intensely grateful. She didn't want her daughter to witness this. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice a thin thread in the quiet room. Liam looked at the blank wall, at the faint but undeniable outline of the door. He thought of Maya's drawing, of the faceless black figure looming over their family. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm less sure about what happens if we don't." He took a deep breath and approached the wall. His first tentative taps with the hammer produced a dull, solid thud. Plaster and wood. Normal. But as he moved toward the center of the outline, the sound changed. It became hollow, resonant, echoing with an emptiness that belied the solid appearance of the wall. There was definitely a space back there. He positioned the pointed end of the crowbar against the wall and swung the sledgehammer. The impact was deafening in the silent house. A spiderweb of cracks radiated from the point of contact, and a puff of fine, gray dust filled the air. He struck it again, and again, each blow a release of the fear and frustration that had been building for weeks. A chunk of plaster and lath broke away, revealing not the expected wooden studs of a normal wall, but something else entirely. Brick. Old, soot-stained, and laid with meticulous care. "It's bricked up," Liam said, his voice rough with exertion and disbelief. Why would anyone brick up a doorway? He worked for over an hour, the rhythmic crash of the hammer and the scrape of the crowbar the only sounds. Sweat poured down his face, plaster dust caking his hair and clothes. Chloe watched, her initial anxiety slowly being replaced by a grim fascination. With each brick he painstakingly pried loose, they were peeling back a layer of history, exhuming a long-buried secret. Finally, a dark opening, just large enough to see through, was created. A wave of stale, cold air washed over them, carrying the same scent Liam had noticed before: damp earth, rot, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. He shone a flashlight into the void. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow, dust-choked corridor that seemed to stretch back much further than the house's layout should allow. It wasn't a pantry or a closet. It was a passage. Driven by a mixture of trepidation and an insatiable need for answers, Liam widened the opening until he could squeeze through. He told Chloe to stay put, to call him if she heard anything. He stepped through the jagged hole, his feet landing on a stone floor thick with a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades, perhaps even a century. The corridor was tight, the brick walls close on either side. It was colder in here, a deep, cellar-like chill that seeped into his bones. As his eyes adjusted, he saw that the walls weren't bare. They were covered in strange, spidery markings, drawn in what looked like charcoal or faded ink. They weren't letters or any symbols he recognized. They were chaotic, angular, and deeply unsettling. He followed the passage as it sloped gently downward, leading him away from the familiar warmth and light of the living room. It ended not at a door, but at another brick wall. However, embedded in the center of this wall was a small, rusted metal box. A safe deposit box or something like it. It was locked, but the years had not been kind to it. The metal around the lock was corroded and weak. With a few sharp blows from the crowbar, the lock gave way, and the small metal door creaked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like rotted velvet, was a single object, a small, leather-bound journal. He carried it back into the light of the living room, the dust of the hidden corridor clinging to him like a shroud. He and Chloe sat on the floor, the journal between them, its leather cover cracked and stiff with age. The name, Eleanora Blackwood, was embossed in faded gold on the cover. A date was written beneath it, 1888. With trembling hands, Chloe opened the journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded from black to a rusty brown. The handwriting was a looping, elegant cursive, but it grew increasingly frantic and erratic as the pages turned. They began to read, and as they did, the history of the house, and the true nature of the secret it held, began to unfurl. The journal belonged to a woman who had lived in the house over a century ago. Eleanora Blackwood wrote of her husband, Alistair, and their young son, Thomas. The early entries were filled with domestic joy picnics in the yard. Thomas's first words, the changing of the seasons as viewed from the living room window. But then, the tone shifted. October 12, 1888. Thomas has been ill. The doctor speaks of a fever of the blood, but his remedies do nothing. My son grows paler by the day. He speaks in his sleep, but the words are not his own. They are whispers in a language I do not know, ancient and harsh. He barely eats. He only stares at the wall in the parlor, the one by the bookshelf. He says a man is in there, a man made of shadows. Chloe stopped reading, her hand flying to her mouth. A man in the wall, a man made of shadows. The whispering man. The parallels to Maya's experiences were chillingly exact. They continued reading, their horror mounting with each entry. Alistair Blackwood, a man of wealth and academic curiosity, had delved into forbidden studies. He had become obsessed with the occult, with communicating with what he called the other side. He believed an entity, a powerful being of immense knowledge and influence, could be summoned and bound to his will. November 3, 1888. Alistair has sealed the doorway. He calls it a necessary precaution. He has been performing rituals in the passage he built behind the wall. He brings strange books into the house, filled with diagrams that make my head spin and my stomach turn. He says he is close to a breakthrough, that he can hear the entity's voice now, promising him secrets of the universe. I hear it too sometimes, a whisper that feels like spiders crawling inside my skull. Calls my name. Thomas grows weaker. He no longer leaves his bed. The journal detailed Alistair's descent into madness. He had succeeded in his ritual, but not in the way he had intended. He had not summoned a servant, but a parasite. The entity, which Eleanora never named but only referred to as the visitor or the shadow, could not fully manifest in their world, but it could influence it. It fed on life, on vitality, on fear. It had latched onto their son, Thomas, draining him, using him as an anchor. December 1, 1888. Thomas is gone. He passed in the night, a mere shell of the boy he was. His last word was a whisper, hungry. Alistair is broken. He sees now the terrible price of his hubris. The whispers from the wall have not ceased. They are louder now, mocking. The shadow is not satisfied. It remains bound to the house, to the space Alistair created for it. But it is strong. It wants more. Alistair says we must leave, that the house must be abandoned. But he fears the shadow will follow. He He says it is tied to our bloodline now. The final entries were a portrait of pure terror. The Blackwoods had become prisoners in their own home, haunted by the entity Alistair had unleashed. It would move objects, create cold spots, and whisper their deepest fears into their minds as they tried to sleep. It was slowly, methodically driving them insane. December 24, 1888. Alistair has a plan. A final, desperate gambit. He says there is a way to weaken it, to put it into a slumber, but it requires a great sacrifice. He has been carving symbols into the bricks, the ones he read about in his damnable books. He says they will act as a lock. I do not understand his talk of celestial alignments and blood seals. I only know that I cannot bear this torment any longer. Tonight, on Christmas Eve, while the rest of the world celebrates with light and love, we will face the darkness we invited into our home. I will hide this journal in the passage. If we fail, may God have mercy on whoever finds it. May they have the sense to flee and never look back. Do not listen to the whispers. It lies. It always lies. That was the last entry. Liam and Chloe sat in silence, the journal lying open between them. The story it told was so fantastical, so utterly insane, that it should have been unbelievable. But they couldn't deny the evidence of their own senses. The cold spots, the whispers, the tapping, Maya's whispering man, it all fit. They hadn't bought a house. They had bought a prison. And they had just picked the lock. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Both of them jumped, their heads snapping toward the hallway. It was just the house settling, Liam told himself. But the excuse felt hollow, a lie he could no longer believe. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer empty. It was watchful. What do we do? Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with terror. The journal said it was in a slumber. Liam reasoned, his mind racing, that the symbols on the bricks were a lock. We've broken the lock. We've woken it up. As if on cue, a faint, melodic sound drifted down from the second floor. It was the nursery rhyme, the one Liam had heard before, played on a tinny, out-of-tune music box. But this time it wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from Maya's bedroom. They scrambled to their feet and sprinted up the stairs, their hearts hammering in their chests. They burst into Maya's room. The room was empty and cold. The music was louder here, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. On Maya's bed, propped against her pillow, was the stick figure drawing she had made. But it was different now. Someone or something had taken the black crayon and drawn a new figure. It was standing inside the drawing of their house, its long, spindly limbs reaching out toward the smiling stick figures of their family. And on its blank, featureless head, 2 small, malevolent dots had been added for eyes. They seemed to stare directly at them. The music box melody stopped, plunging the room into a deafening silence. And from the hallway, just outside the bedroom door, came a soft, dry, whispering sound, like dead leaves skittering across a stone floor. Hungry. The whisper was not a sound in the conventional sense. It did not travel through the air to be processed by the ear. It was a direct injection of malice into the deepest, most primitive part of the brain. Hungry. The word was ancient, laden with the weight of an insatiable, eons-long starvation. Liam and Chloe stood frozen in Maya's bedroom, the altered drawing on the bed a stark testament to the violation that had occurred. The presence in the hall was a palpable thing, a knot of cold, predatory intelligence. Liam reacted first, his parental instinct overriding his fear. He shoved Chloe behind him and slammed the bedroom door shut, fumbling with the old-fashioned lock. He turned the key, the click sounding like a gunshot in the charged silence. "It's in the house," Chloe breathed, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes locked on the door. "It's not in the wall anymore." The tinny music box melody started up again, but this time it was just outside the door, a mocking, distorted lullaby. Liam grabbed the heaviest object. He could find a solid oak lamp from Maya's nightstand and held it like a club. They were trapped. For what felt like an eternity, they listened as the soft, dry, rustling sound moved around the second-floor landing. It was a sound of inquiry, of exploration. It was learning the layout of its new domain. They heard the floorboards in the hallway creak, the doorknob to their own bedroom rattle gently, experimentally. The entity was patient. It had waited over a century. It had time. Then silence. The music stopped. The rustling ceased. Liam strained his ears, listening for any sign of its presence. Nothing. Is it gone? Chloe whispered. Liam didn't dare to believe it. He crept toward the door and pressed his ear against the cool wood. He could hear only the frantic beating of his own heart. Slowly, cautiously, he turned the key and pulled the door open a crack. The hallway was empty. The oppressive cold had dissipated, and the air felt normal again. It was as if nothing had happened. But they knew better. The violation lingered. It had been in their daughter's room, had touched her things. The sanctuary of their home had been irrevocably breached. "We have to get out of here," Chloe said, her voice shaking but firm. "Now, Liam." We grab Maya, we get in the car, and we leave. We don't pack, we don't look back. Liam knew she was right. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. But as he looked around the room, at the life they had just started to build, a different, colder thought took root. He picked up Eleanor Blackwood's journal from where they dropped it. He fears the shadow will follow. He says it is tied to our bloodline now. "What if it follows us?" he asked quietly. The journal said it attached itself to the Blackwoods, to their son. What if breaking the seal, waking it up? What if that created a new connection? To us? To Maya? The unspoken horror of his question hung between them. What if leaving wasn't an escape? What if they were simply taking the monster with them, carrying the seed of this darkness to a new home, a new town? What if they led it straight to their daughter? The dilemma was paralyzing. To stay was to live in a house with a malevolent entity. To leave was to risk taking that entity with them, with no walls, no seals, no prison to contain it. Alistair Blackwood tried to fight it, Liam said, his mind racing as he flipped through the brittle pages of the journal. He failed, but he must have learned something. There has to be a clue in here, something that tells us what this thing is, what it wants, how to stop it. Their investigation became a frantic, desperate search for knowledge. They took the journal and retreated to the master bedroom, locking the door behind them. While Chloe made a panicked call to her friend, fabricating a story about a sudden family emergency that required them to pick up Maya and keep her overnight, Liam spread the pages of the journal across the bed. He read and reread every word, searching for any detail Alistair might have let slip. The entity was incorporeal, a shadow. It fed on life force, particularly that of the young and the fearful. It could manipulate the physical environment in small ways, moving objects, creating sounds, lowering the temperature. It was a creature of influence and suggestion, a parasite that attacked the mind as much as the body. Alistair had called it a resonant echo, a being trapped between dimensions, drawn to places where the veil was thin. His ritual had not just called it, but had torn a permanent hole, making the house a beacon. The final entry was the key. He has been carving symbols into the bricks. He says they will act as a lock. Celestial alignments and blood seals. He didn't just brick up the passage, Liam realized aloud. He created a ward. The symbols, the bricks themselves, they were the prison. And we just smashed our way through it. Chloe returned, her face pale. "Maya's safe. She'll be staying with Sarah tonight. I told her our furnace was acting up and I was worried about a gas leak. It's a flimsy excuse, but it's the best I could do." She looked at the journal. "Did you find anything?" "Maybe," Liam said. "Alistair created a prison. We need to figure out how to rebuild it." He knew what he had to do. He had to go back into the passage. Chloe was vehemently against it. "No, Liam, you can't go back in there. It's where the thing is strongest." "It's not in there anymore," he argued. "It's out here with us. The passage is just a corridor now. But the symbols Alistair used, the ones he carved on the bricks, they have to be the answer. I need to see them to understand them." Armed with a powerful flashlight and his phone to take pictures, Liam descended the stairs. The house was quiet again, but it was a predatory quiet now. The living room was cold, and the hole in the wall gaped like an open wound. He hesitated at the threshold, the memory of the cloying, sweet smell of decay filling his nostrils. Taking a steadying breath, he squeezed back through the opening. The chill in the corridor was immediate and profound. It was a dead, ancient cold that felt utterly alien to the natural world. He ran the beam of his flashlight over the brick walls. The spidery markings were everywhere. He had been wrong to think them chaotic. Now, looking closer, he could see a pattern, a kind of terrifying, non-Euclidean geometry. The lines intersected at impossible angles, creating shapes that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision. They made his head ache and his stomach churn. He systematically began taking pictures, capturing every inch of the strange graffiti. As he worked his way deeper into the passage, he noticed something he had missed before. Faint scratches on the stone floor. He crouched down, angling the light. They were letters, crudely carved into the stone, almost hidden beneath the layer of ancient dust. It was a single phrase, repeated over and over again. It wears a mask of memory. It wears a mask of memory. It wears a mask of memory. What did it mean? A mask of memory? As he pondered the cryptic message, a sound from the end of the passage made him freeze. A faint, wet, tearing sound. It was coming from beyond the second brick wall, the one where he had found the journal. He had assumed the passage ended there. But now, as he listened, he realized the sound was coming from inside the wall. He approached cautiously, his flashlight beam trembling. The small, rusted metal box where the journal had been was still open, its door hanging askew. But the wall around it, it was changing. The mortar between the bricks seemed to be darkening, turning moist and black. A hairline crack appeared, then another, spreading like veins across the surface. The tearing sound grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural groaning, as if the house itself were in agony. The sweet, cloying smell of rot intensified, becoming almost suffocating. This wasn't just a passage. This was an antechamber. Alistair hadn't just sealed the entity behind one wall. He had created a cage within a cage. They had breached the outer defenses, and now the inner prison was beginning to fail. Panic seized him. He scrambled backward, turning to flee, and his flashlight beam swept across the opening that led back to the living room. A figure was standing there, silhouetted against the light from the room. It was impossibly tall and thin, its limbs too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. It was a sketch brought to life, a creature of pure, undiluted nightmare. The whispering man, the shadow. Liam's breath hitched in his throat. His blood ran cold. The figure was made of a darkness that seemed to drink the light around it. It had no discernible features, no face, no eyes, yet he felt its gaze on him, a gaze of infinite hunger and ancient hatred. It did not move, it simply stood there, blocking his only exit. He was trapped in the corridor with the source of the house's malevolence, and the wall behind him was beginning to break. The groaning from within the bricks grew louder, the vibrations traveling through the stone floor and up into his bones. He was caught between the monster and its master, between the shadow and the abyss it had crawled out of. Then, the shadow thing tilted its head, a gesture that was shockingly, horribly human. And it spoke. It did not speak with a voice of its own, but with a collage of stolen sounds. It was Maya's laughter, twisted into a mocking cackle. It was Chloe's voice, whispering his name in a tone of desperate fear. It was the tinny music box melody, woven into a symphony of dread. It wears a mask of memory. He understood now. It used their memories, their love, their fears as a weapon. It created a mask from the sounds and emotions of its victims to draw them in, to paralyze them with confusion and terror. The figure in the doorway took a jerky, unnatural step forward into the passage. The groaning from the wall behind Liam reached a crescendo, and with a sound like splintering bone, one of the bricks near the center shot inward, disappearing into the darkness beyond. A wave of indescribable cold and a stench of open graves washed out of the new opening. Liam screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. He was no longer thinking, only reacting. He couldn't go forward. He couldn't stay where he was. He did the only thing he could. he charged. He lowered his shoulder and ran directly at the shadow thing, bellowing with a fear-fueled rage. He expected to hit a solid form, but his charge met with no resistance. He passed right through it, a sensation of icy, soul-deep cold washing over him, a feeling like 1,000 ghostly fingers clutching at his heart. He stumbled out into the living room, gasping, falling to his knees on the hardwood floor. He looked back. The shadow thing was gone. But the sounds from within the passage, the groaning, the tearing, the whispers were now pouring into the living room, a torrent of psychic filth unleashed from its century-long prison. The hole in the wall was no longer just a hole. It was a wound, and it was bleeding darkness into their home. He had not escaped. He had only opened the door wider. The immediate aftermath of Liam's escape from the passage was a chaotic blur of sensory overload. The living room, once a symbol of their future, had become the epicenter of a psychic earthquake. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the whispers that had once been faint and intermittent were now a constant, layered cacophony. They were the auditory equivalent of television static, but woven within the hiss were distinct, chilling voices: a child crying, a man muttering in a language that wasn't human, a woman screaming a single, endless note. Chloe rushed down the stairs, drawn by Liam's scream, and stopped dead at the sight of him on the floor and the palpable wrongness that had consumed the room. "Liam, what happened? What's going on?" "It's breaking through," he gasped, scrambling to his feet and backing away from the gaping wound in the wall. "The inner wall, the real prison. It's coming down." As he spoke, the lights in the living room began to flicker violently. The television switched on by itself, cycling through channels at a dizzying speed, each station dissolving into static before the next one appeared. On the mantelpiece, a framed photo of their family rattled and shook before flying across the room and shattering against the far wall. The house was having a seizure, convulsing under the strain of the entity's burgeoning power. "The photos," Liam croaked, his mind connecting the fragmented clues, the symbols from the passage. "I need to get the pictures off my phone." They fled upstairs to his office, the most insulated room in the house, and locked the door. The assault continued, but it was more muffled here. They could hear doors slamming downstairs, the sound of glass breaking, and the incessant, maddening whispers that seemed to seep through the very floorboards. Liam plugged his phone into his computer, his hands shaking so badly it took 3 attempts to connect the cable. He pulled up the dozens of photos he had taken of the symbols in the corridor. On the computer screen, divorced from the oppressive atmosphere of the passage, he could see them more clearly. They were a complex tapestry of arcane geometry, alchemy symbols, and what looked like astronomical charts. "Alistair wasn't just a dabbler," Liam muttered, enlarging one of the images. This is sophisticated. It's like a circuit diagram for a ghost trap." While Liam frantically cross-referenced the symbols with images he found on websites dedicated to mythology and the occult, Chloe pored over the journal again, reading the final, desperate entries with a new understanding. Celestial alignments, blood seals, a great sacrifice. "Liam, listen to this," she said, her voice tight. Eleonora wrote. "He says there is a way to weaken it, to put it into a slumber, but it requires a great sacrifice. He wasn't trying to destroy it. He was just trying to put it to sleep. And he failed, didn't he? Or he didn't complete the ritual. What if Thomas's death was the sacrifice?" Liam theorized, a sick feeling rising in his throat. What if the entity took him before Alistair could complete the ritual, and his death inadvertently fueled it, made it stronger? A new, terrifying thought began to form. Alistair had created a prison. But every prison needs a lock, and every lock needs a key. The symbols were the design of the lock, but what was the key? Blood seals. The phrase from the journal echoed in his mind. Alistair had tied the entity to his bloodline. Not by accident, but by design. The entity was bound to the Blackwood family. As long as a Blackwood lived, the prison held a certain power. But the Blackwoods were long gone. The house had passed through countless hands over the decades, none of them related. The lock had been weakening for a century, the power of the blood seal fading with time. And then they had come. A new family, with a young child. "Oh God," Chloe whispered, her face ashen as she arrived at the same horrifying conclusion. "It's not us it's tied to. Not really. It's the house. The house is the anchor. It needs a source. A battery. It was using Thomas. Now it wants Maya." The realization was a physical blow. Their daughter wasn't just being haunted. She was being targeted. She was the intended power source for a parasitic entity from another dimension. This was why it had grown so much stronger since they arrived. Their presence, Maya's presence, was feeding it, giving it the strength to finally break free from its decaying prison. Downstairs, a thunderous crash shook the entire house, followed by the sound of splintering wood. It sounded as if the grand piano in the corner of the living room had been overturned. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, dominant voice. It was a cold, guttural, commanding voice that spoke in that alien, grating language. "It's getting stronger by the minute," Liam said, forcing himself to focus. "Okay, the symbols. They're a form of containment. Alistair used them on the bricks. Maybe we can use them to reinforce the house itself. Create a new, larger prison." It was a desperate, half-baked plan, but it was the only one they had. Using his graphic design software, Liam began to isolate and clean up the symbols from his photos. They were incredibly complex. Some he recognized from his cursory online search words against evil, symbols for binding, for sealing. Others were completely alien. He realized he didn't need to understand them, he just needed to replicate them. While he worked, Chloe took on the grim task of finding a way to draw them. They had no charcoal, no special inks. In a moment of grim inspiration, she ran to the fireplace in their bedroom. She gathered the soot and ash from the hearth, mixing it with water from the ensuite bathroom to create a thick, black paste. It was primitive, but it would have to do. Their plan was simple and insane. They would start with the bedroom, turning it into a panic room, a warded sanctuary. Then, if they survived the night, they would try to do the same to the rest of the house, reinscribing the fading prison walls. They worked in a frantic, feverish state. Liam would display a symbol on his laptop screen, and Chloe would painstakingly replicate it on the walls, the doors, and even the windows of the master bedroom, her hands quickly becoming black with the ash paste. The symbols felt foul, wrong. Her fingers tingled as she drew them, and a metallic taste filled her mouth. Outside the bedroom door, the entity raged. It hammered on the wood, the impacts shaking the frame. The doorknob glowed with a faint, malevolent red heat. The whispers slithered under the door, curling into their minds, speaking their deepest insecurities aloud. "She blames you for this, Liam. You brought her to this house. You broke the seal. He doesn't love you enough to protect you, Chloe. He will run. He will leave you." They fought to ignore the voices, focusing on their task. As Chloe painted the final, complex symbol on the center of the door, the hammering stopped. The red glow from the doorknob faded. The whispers receded, not gone, but muted, as if they were now on the other side of a thick pane of glass. They collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily, covered in sweat and soot. For the moment they were safe. The ward was holding, but they knew it was a temporary solution. They had created a tiny island of safety in a house that was now completely overrun. They could hear the entity moving freely through the halls, its dry, rustling footsteps like a death rattle. They could feel its frustration, its rage, beating against the symbols on the walls like a physical force. As the hours crept by, Liam delved deeper into the structure of the symbols, arranging them on his screen, trying to understand the syntax of Alistair's arcane language. He discovered a central, recurring symbol, one that seemed to be the focal point of all the others. It was a complex circular design, containing a stylized eye. And then he found it. In the background of one of his photos of the passage, almost completely obscured by shadow, was more of the crude, scratched writing on the floor. It was a different phrase. "Its name is the key. To unravel is to bind." Its name, Liam breathed. That's it. That's the key to the lock. Alistair wasn't just sealing it. He was performing a binding ritual. And in all these rituals, you need the entity's true name to have power over it. He frantically scanned the journal again. Eleonora never named it. She called it the visitor, the shadow, the whispering man. Alistair, in his hubris, probably never bothered to write it down. To unravel is to bind, Chloe repeated, reading the phrase on the screen. What does that mean? I think it's a riddle, Liam said, his mind racing. The name is hidden somewhere. We have to unravel something to find it. He looked at the circular symbol on his screen, the one with the eye. It was intricate, a web of interlocking lines. Maybe the name is in the symbol itself. It was a long shot, a desperate leap of logic born from terror and exhaustion. Using his software, he isolated the central symbol. It was a beautiful, terrifying piece of art. He began to trace its lines, to unspool them, to mentally pull the threads of the design apart. He tried to see it not as a picture, but as a word, a name written in a language of symbols. And then he saw it. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language he knew. The lines, when separated and rearranged, formed a series of sharp, angular letters. It was a name that felt like broken glass in his mind. Mordecai. The moment he pieced the name together, the moment he thought it, something in the house shifted. The pressure against the walls of their room vanished. The whispers stopped completely. Profound, absolute silence descended. And in that silence, a new sound began. A slow, deliberate, heavy footstep coming from the living room. It was not the dry rustle of the shadow thing. This was something else. Something solid. Thump. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Thump. It was coming up the stairs. Thump. Liam, Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror. What did you do? I think, he said, his voice trembling as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped directly outside their door. I think I just let it know that we know its name. A low, resonant voice spoke from the other side of the door. It was not the cacophony of stolen voices from before. This was a single, clear, and ancient voice, a voice that dripped with regal authority and bottomless contempt. You are clever little things. The voice of Mordecai boomed, the sound vibrating through the wood of the door. You have found my name, but a name is only a key, can be used to lock a door, or to open it wide. You have breached my prison. You have trespassed in my house. And now you will be my guest. Permanently. The door, covered in Chloe's protective, ashen symbols, began to splinter. The voice of Mordecai was a physical force. It pressed in on them, vibrating in their bones, a resonant bass that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. The symbols Chloe had painted on the door, their only shield, began to glow with a faint, sickly green light before flaking away like burnt paper, the ash turning to inert dust on the floor. The wood of the door groaned and splintered, not from a physical blow, but as if the integrity of the material itself was being unwound from the inside out. It's not just a shadow anymore, Liam whispered, his mind struggling to comprehend the shift. Finding the name hadn't weakened it. It had given it focus. It had allowed the entity to coalesce, to pull its dissipated, chaotic energy into a singular, terrifying purpose. They hadn't found a weapon. They had rung the dinner bell. They scrambled backward, away from the dissolving door, until their backs hit the far wall. There was nowhere left to run. This room, their hastily constructed sanctuary, was about to become their tomb. With a final, explosive crack, the door burst inward, ripped from its hinges and thrown across the room. Standing in the doorway was the source of the voice. It was no longer the indistinct, faceless shadow figure from the corridor. The entity now had a form, though it was a mockery of anything natural. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body vaguely humanoid but elongated and skeletal, as if a human skeleton had been stretched on a rack. Its flesh, if it could be called that, was the color of old bruises and seemed to shift and writhe like a cloak of living smoke. Its long, multi-jointed arms ended in fingers that were little more than sharpened talons of bone. But the worst part was its head. It had no face in the traditional Senseno eyes, no nose. There was only a smooth, pale expanse of skin, and a wide, lipless mouth, filled with a forest of needle-like teeth. This mouth opened, and the voice of Mordecai filled the room again, a sound of grinding stones and ancient evil. "You have my name," it rasped, taking a slow step into the room. A wave of nauseating cold rolled in with it. "Now you will learn my nature." This was it, the final confrontation. There was no escape. Liam's mind, supercharged with adrenaline and terror, raced through everything he had learned. Its name is the key. To unravel is to bind. He had unraveled the symbol to find the name. But what if the second part of the phrase was the true instruction? What if binding it required them to do the opposite? To create the symbol, to draw the lock with the key the Namit its center? It was a desperate, insane gamble. "The journal!" he yelled to Chloe, who was staring, mesmerized in horror, at the approaching creature. His shout snapped her out of it. She grabbed the brittle book from the bed. "Keep it busy!" he screamed, though he had no idea how. As Mordecai advanced, its smoky form seeming to suck the very warmth and color from the room, Liam grabbed the small, heavy tin of ash paste. He dropped to his knees and began to draw on the hardwood. Thomas laughed for the first time today, a sound like tiny bells. The creature, Mordecai, paused, tilted its featureless head. "Memory." It hissed the word a sibilant poison. It was distracted, intrigued by the echoes of a life it had long ago consumed. The mask of memory wasn't just its weapon. It was its nature. It was a resonant echo, and the words of the journal were a powerful, forgotten resonance. Liam's hands flew across the floor. He drew the interlocking lines, the arcane angles, his mind's eye seeing the pattern from his computer screen. It was a race against time, his movements sloppy and frantic. August 19th. Chloe's voice trembled, but she continued to read, her words a shield of light against the encroaching darkness. "Alistair brought home a new book for my collection. We sat by the fire in the parlor, the rain tapping against the window. Mordecai took another step, its talons scraping grooves into the wooden floor. The parlor. My parlor." The voice was less certain now, a flicker of confusion in its ancient malevolence. It was being pulled back, anchored by the memories it had absorbed. It was remembering being the visitor, the formless whisper in the wall, before it had a name. Liam finished the main body of the symbol. It was a crude, misshapen caricature of the original, but the essential geometry was there. Now for the center, the key. He had to write the name. He began to form the sharp, angular letters, the name that felt like a curse on his tongue. Mordecai. As he drew the final letter, the creature snapped its head toward him, the illusion broken. "No?" it roared, the sound a physical blast of force that sent books and lamps flying from the shelves. It lunged, its smoky form collapsing the distance between them in an instant. "Now, Chloe!" Liam yelled. "The last entry. The blood seal." Chloe flipped to the end of the journal. A great sacrifice. A blood seal. They had no time for a complex ritual. They had to improvise. She understood. With a cry, she bit down hard on her own hand, drawing blood. She slammed her bleeding hand onto the final page of the journal, smearing the words of Eleanora's last, desperate hope with her own life force. "By blood and memory, I name you," she screamed, her voice raw with terror and defiance. "By the pain of this house, I bind you, Mordecai." At the same time, Liam, seeing the creature's talons descending upon him, thrust his own hand into the center of the symbol he had drawn, pressing his palm into the wet, sooty name. "Mordecai!" he bellowed, pouring all of his fear, his anger, and his desperate hope into that one word. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The symbol on the floor erupted in a blinding flash of silver light. The light was not warm. It was cold, sharp, and absolute. It was the light of a dead star, a light of pure order and binding. Mordecai shrieked, a sound that was not of this world, a tearing, rending noise that seemed to rip a hole in the fabric of reality. The creature's form was caught in the light, its smoky flesh turning translucent, revealing the screaming, skeletal structure within. It was being pulled, stretched, distorted. It reached for Liam, its talons inches from his face, but it was like a swimmer caught in a powerful current. The light from the symbol was an anchor, dragging it down, pulling it toward the crude circle on the floor. The entire house convulsed. The windows shattered, the walls cracked, and a psychic wind howled through the rooms. Downstairs, the gaping hole in the living room wall began to glow with the same intense, silver light. The prison was reasserting itself. Mordecai's form began to unravel, the way Liam had unraveled the symbol on his computer. Its body dissolved into black, smoky tendrils, all of them being sucked violently toward the symbol on the floor. Its final, agonized roar was not a word, but a feeling of endless, eternal frustration and hatred. And then, with a final, implosive rush, it was gone. The last wisp of its smoky form was pulled into the symbol, and the light winked out, plunging the room into a sudden, shocking silence. The only sounds were Liam and Chloe's ragged, desperate gasps for air. The room was a wreck. The door was gone, furniture was overturned, and the floor was scarred by the creature's talons and the glowing symbol, which was now just a smear of soot and ash. But the cold was gone. The oppressive, malevolent presence that had suffocated them for weeks had vanished. The air was clean. They stumbled into each other's arms, holding on tight, shaking uncontrollably. They had done it. They had faced the monster in their home and, against all odds, they had won. They did not stay another night. As the first light of dawn broke, they collected a sleeping, blissfully unaware Maya from their neighbor's house. They walked back into their ravaged home, packed a single bag of essentials, and left. They didn't look back at the broken windows, the shattered picture frames, or the ugly, gaping wound in the living room wall that led to a corridor of scribbled warnings and forgotten history. The house on Sycamore Lane still stands. From the outside, it looks like any other old Victorian, perhaps in need of some repair. But sometimes, on the quietest of nights, when the wind is just right, neighbors claim to hear a faint, tapping sound from within its empty rooms. And local real estate agents have found it impossible to sell. Potential buyers will walk into the grand living room, a space filled with sunlight and possibility, and they will be overcome by a sudden, inexplicable chill. They will find their eyes drawn to a long, blank stretch of wall, covered in faded floral wallpaper, and they will feel a deep, primal urge to turn and flee, a feeling that they are being watched by something that lurks just beyond the living room, something ancient and hungry, sleeping a restless, imprisoned sleep and waiting, always waiting,